All right. Projecting. How many of you guys project? Every time? What makes the difference of when you project and when you don't? Oh, all right. If your projector is working, that's a key thing. If the IEP system is up and running, right? It's not always working. It is much better than the old system way back when. But there are times when it's not up. Yeah, and I think there are times when you're projecting what's being typed, and you have some parents who really appreciate that because they can see everything. And if you do type in something wrong, they can say, wait a minute, that's not what I meant, right? And there are other times when it interferes with the whole process because everybody is scrutinizing every keystroke that they see. So I've seen some people who their notes, they're not projecting. The main sections of the IEP from a different computer, they are projecting. So it's, I don't know, it's kind of a toss-up. If you're not projecting and you're not working on the IEP, or you're not having it there for everybody to see, you do need to make sure that people are taking very careful notes. Because one of the biggest complaints from parents is that we agreed on something during the meeting, and that's not what it said in the IEP when I got it. Okay? So if you're typing it and they can see it, they know exactly what's going to be in the IEP. If you're not, just make sure that you're taking good notes and that every now and then somebody is saying, okay, here's what I typed. Did I hear that correctly? Okay, you do some clarification along the way. Do work on the IEP in some form or fashion, though. I've been to several meetings where I'm facilitating, everybody's giving input, and I'm looking around, nobody seems to be taking notes, nobody's got a computer open, and I'm like, how the heck are you going to remember all this stuff that we decided? Because you aren't. You're not going to get all those details down. And that ticks parents off, right? Because you're going to leave something out. Parent concerns. I don't care how ridiculous, how small, how big, it doesn't matter. If the parent gives you a concern, type it somewhere. Type it in the parent concerns section. That would be the best. But if not, it needs to make it somewhere in the notes. And then how you address that. How did the school respond? So if the parent says, I want, a guide pony for my daughter because she needs her pony with her at all times to feel safe, you note that in the IEP. The parent has requested that she be able to bring her pony to school. The school is going to take this under consideration and we'll get back to her. Or, if the school says that's not allowable, type it, whatever the situation is. Sometimes, whether you get an acceptable IEP or not can hinge on one word. I've seen meetings boiled down to whether or not we said extended time or we said extended time as needed. And that made the difference of whether a parent would accept an IEP. So, again, get that discussion going. If it's going to be an issue, have it written in the IEP exactly as the group decided it should be in the IEP. Choosing your words. I'm probably not the best at this. I stick my foot in my mouth all the time, and I acknowledge it when it happens. Though sometimes I say something and go, "Okay, that came out totally wrong. Let me start over." But the damage may already be done at that point. Just use respectful language. Even when you think somebody at the table is crazy, you've got to really choose how you're going to address this. Avoiding all those acronyms, and that is so hard for all of us because we live in the world of acronyms. Even when I write my psych reports, I try to get rid of as much of the language that I'm used to speaking in as possible because That's my language and my profession. It's not what parents read. It's not what gen ed teachers read. And a lot of special ed teachers, I may use some language that they go, what are you talking about here? And it especially hits home for me when I get an outside report from somebody and read it and go, holy cow, I have no idea what they're talking about. You'd think from one psych to another, you'd at least get what they were saying. I had no clue. One of the reports I read recently, I'm like, this is completely worthless. It doesn't tell me anything usable about the student. Jargon, there's a lot of jargon that people put in IEPs that everybody at the table, including the parent, may understand. But if that IEP gets sent to a new school because the kid moves, they have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about pride time or something that is internal to your school system. The more that we can rely on factual data, the better off we're going to be. So, things that are emotionally based, opinion based, like he's unmotivated. I don't know if the kid's unmotivated. I know what he's doing and what he's not doing. Those are facts. Whether he is unmotivated, incapable, lazy, or anxious, I can't be sure of, right? But if you talk about performance data and what a student does and what a student doesn't do or how they respond, then you're not going to elicit all those same emotions that you would if you use terms like, even if you're not meaning it in a bad way, if you say, I really just think he's not motivated in my class, that pulls out a different set of emotions from a parent or from that student who says, it's not that. It's not that I'm unmotivated. I don't get what you're asking me to do. Or, I have your class first period and I don't get breakfast at home. So my mind is not algebra. Make sure all your information is current. If we come into a conference in May and we're talking about the October NWEA scores, it's not current. That was almost a whole school year ago. We need current information. And we need clear information as opposed to he's making a B, right? A B for one kid could mean they made a whole lot of A pluses and 2 missing assignments that were zeros and shot them down to a B. For another kid, it's I'm consistently doing B work. For another kid, it's I'm making A's on all my homework and D's on all my quizzes, right? Very different picture that you get. You want to make sure that you're positive, but that you're realistic. So if you've got a lot of negative stuff that you have to share about a student, try to find some positives to add in there. You need to balance it somehow for the parent and for the student to hear, as well as for the rest of the group. But you also don't want to be misleading. Sometimes we get students with a 65 IQ who are doing completely modified work, but they've been getting A's for a long time, and the parent doesn't understand why they're not working on the same stuff that everyone else is, because that information's been kind of shielded. We want things to be transparent. This is what he's doing. Now, at the same time, this is what other kids in the grade are doing, and this is how it's different. Another reason why it's so important to have that general education teacher really giving good input at your conferences. Those teachers know what everyone else is doing. We know what our kids are doing. I really hope this is a no-brainer for everybody who's watching, listening. But every IEP meeting has to do the whole IEP process. You can't just go in and work on a certain piece of the IEP if you're holding an actual IEP meeting. Now, there are some things that you may go into a lot more detail than others because you have more development to do in that area. There are some pieces that don't apply to certain students. But rather than just glossing over that kind of information, make sure and state why we're not completing a section. So I guess the way I used to use paper copy IEPs before the IEP system was really up and running through most of the state, and we had a whole page that was all the special conditions, special considerations. So if the student had blindness or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, if English was not their native language, if they needed assistive technology, if they had behavior that was interfering, all of those things. And for most of the kids that I worked with, none of those things applied. And so we would kind of get to that page and go, okay, this page doesn't apply, and we just move on. But parents need to know, wait a minute, why doesn't this apply? Because for one, they think they're missing out on something. Same thing with extended school year. A lot of times you'll say, well, this really doesn't apply. Wait a minute, what is that? Tell me about this and tell me why it doesn't apply. So I think if you can use specific things to say, okay, English is your native language, so we don't need to talk about second language related kinds of issues. And just skip through it, but skip through it purposefully. And make sure that you go over all the pieces and parts and stick to your agenda so that you're doing it in the proper order. Sometimes I use a parking lot when we facilitate meetings, and I have an actual chart that just says parking lot on it, so that if issues come up that are either later in the process that somebody just wants me to write it down to say, don't forget to talk about this, then I can put it in the parking lot and they know that they've been heard. So you get some validation that you did hear me, you're acknowledging that I want to talk about it, but not yet, right? So I put those kinds of things in a parking lot. Or there are other things that really have nothing to do with the IEP process, but you, again, want to acknowledge that somebody heard you, and yeah, we're going to need to talk about that with so-and-so. So one example is a parent who, in the middle of the meeting, says, oh yeah, and I need to address his lunch account because his lunch account is not right, and I know I put money in there. That has nothing to do with the IEP, but it's important to the parent. And if they're anything like me, if I don't write it down somewhere, I'm going to forget now for another week to even go back and talk about it. So to put it on a parking lot and say, you know, Mrs. Green will talk to the lunch lady and find out what's going on with the account. It just validates that and lets you move on with the IEP. All right, so we still, no matter if we did all those things, we still have those meetings to where we run into differences of opinion or clashing personalities or whatever that causes our meetings to go south. And there are a lot of different kinds of techniques that you can do. And so I just put a few of these up here, and I'll kind of tell you what I mean by these things. And again, none of them are difficult, and you don't need all of them all the time, but if you have kind of a little toolkit that says, okay, if I run into a situation, I can use something. I've got something to go to. Red, yellow, green, you know, a lot of our computer labs, I see this, they have the solo cups, red, yellow, and green solo cups. And if you're doing fine, it's on green, right? The teacher doesn't need you. You put yours on red, you're stuck. You put yours on yellow, that means I need some help when you get a chance, but I can keep working. You can do the same kinds of things when you're dealing with hot issues in a meeting to use that kind of a system. And when we say, okay, are we all in agreement on this or not? And people can put their cups up. So if I know somebody's on yellow, it's not that they are completely against this idea. They're just not there yet. They need more information. And so you know to ask that person, tell me more about what your concerns are. I wouldn't use this on a regular basis, but if you're dealing with a big group and a lot of different opinions, something like this can be helpful. You sometimes have meetings where one person wants to go on and on and on about an issue when they say to their point in the first sentence. And sometimes you have to move to a timer system to say, okay, we have got to get through this IEP meeting. So I'll tell you what, anybody who wants to share information on this, I'm going to give you a minute. And after that, you got to agree to stop and move on to the next person. So think about what you want to say, because it all has to be in that minute. Sometimes that does the trick. Walk and talk. Now with walk and talk, and I think I have another slide later that talks about that breaks are an okay thing. Every now and then you need a break. When things are just not moving, you may want to take a bathroom break, water break, whatever. And you may have a person that you need to say, walk with me. Let's talk a little bit. Because they may not want to share information with the whole group about what their concern is. Even though you've agreed that you're going to share information and ask questions, it's still hard sometimes. So pulling somebody to walk around the hall for a minute may be worth your time and may keep you moving forward. Did anybody ever watch Columbo when you were younger? Only one person. I feel so old. I watched Columbo. I loved Columbo when I was a kid. And Columbo was always really good. He was a detective. He was good at acting kind of ignorant of a situation. So there are times when I'm facilitating that I know what's going on, but I can tell a few other people maybe aren't getting it. And so I play the role of, instead of somebody else having to ask, because you don't want to be the one person to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I'll say, okay, wait a minute. I'm really confused. Let's see. Let me see if I can figure this out. And ask them for clarification in that way so that it gets clarification for the rest of the group. So sometimes you have to put yourself in that role of acting like you don't get it in order for everybody else to get it. Using standard brainstorming technique to say, okay, if we've got a lot of different possibilities here, you just list them out. We're not going to discuss them yet, but let's list out all the possibilities we could think of. You may be down to a couple of key choices, whether it's talking about a service or whether or not to do certain accommodations, or even something as big as placement decisions of we could go here, we could go at this school, we could go in this classroom. But if you're down to a few key things, you may want to take the time for each of them to say, okay, let's look at all the advantages and limitations of each one so that we have more information for making a decision. Restating what people say, and just restating verbatim. So, okay, let me say it again. You just said you think blah, blah, blah. Sometimes even when you restate something verbatim and that person hears it out loud, they say, okay, that's not what I meant though. And they may need to make some clarification. Other times it helps because now the rest of the group has heard that point one more time and you've caught their attention so that everyone is truly hearing everyone else. Sometimes rather than restating things verbatim, it helps to reflect what someone is saying. So what I think I'm hearing you say is this, and that's just counseling kinds of, it's exactly what you would get if you were in counseling. But sometimes that makes a difference. I had a conference earlier this year where I had a parent arguing one thing and I had the school arguing something else, and I said, wait a minute, I think you guys are saying the exact same thing, you're just saying it differently. So what I heard you say is this, and what I heard you also say is this. They're like, oh yeah. Sometimes just the presentation of the way you say something makes you think we're not on the same page when we really are. Accept, legitimize, deal with, defer. Okay, that's just, the name of a tool. But basically it's saying, here's what I heard you say. Okay, thank you for that input. Legitimizing that is your opinion. I hear what you're saying. And then either deciding to deal with that suggestion or putting it on the back burner to say, okay, let's get some more opinions out here. Let's get some more information. And then we'll come back to that. But again, what you don't want to ever do is have somebody offer input, have dead silence, and then move right on and not even acknowledge that they just said it. But that happens. And it happens usually when it's opinion that is either way outside of what we are used to doing, or it's something that is way off the charts as far as ridiculous in cost or in time commitment or something like that. Make sure and use your agenda and use your ground rules. They have a purpose. Sometimes it also takes that acknowledging the elephant in the room. One of the first meetings I did at the start of this school year was a facilitated meeting. And the student had been suspended the previous year at school. And the parent disagreed with the suspension. And mind you, this was either a first grader or a second grader. I mean, it was something that you really wouldn't expect. And it was for throwing blocks or something like that. But there was a lot more to it. But the parent had requested that suspension, even though it was already served, be removed from the child's record because they did not feel like the behavior plan had been followed for a student. And so it really wasn't fair to have given the suspension. And we started the meeting. And that was kind of an aside. That really didn't have anything to do with the IEP, right? But that was the elephant in the room. And we were moving slowly and painfully through this process. And finally, I said, okay, wait a minute. I think I know what's on your mind, so let's just get it out there and deal with it. Let's deal with this elephant right now. And once that was dealt with, the meeting moved on smoothly. But until that was acknowledged, that was a roadblock that we weren't going to be able to get around until somebody just said, okay, let's deal with this now. When you get questions or when you get concerns, I tend to boomerang them back to either the person who asked them or to the group, rather than trying to answer everything myself. Because I think you get a lot better information, especially if you're in a situation where, and I know we had more people kind of join us here since the beginning, so I'd asked, and everybody was pretty much a special ed teacher or coordinator, you guys as well. I know as the psych, I don't go to that many meetings because there aren't that many that would involve me. But when I am there, I feel like everyone looks to me for the answers. And I would bet, as the teachers of record, you guys are the ones that everyone is staring at in your standard meeting to just answer all the questions. But when somebody throws out a question, I try to send it back out, just like a boomerang. And I'll either say to the group, well, what do you guys all think about that? Just throw it back out there so that it's not me always answering the question. Or if it is somebody who has sent out a question or a concern, I may shoot it right back to that person and say, well, first tell me what your idea is about this. Tell me what you think. Or tell me what your solution to that would be. And then also get input from everyone else. Because unless you know if there's some preconceived kind of answer, you don't really know where this is going. Humor is good. I like humor. But you have to be really careful with how you use it. I tend to use humor in conferences at my own expense. Or if I know somebody really, really well, I may use some humor and kind of jab at them a little bit. I try to never use humor when it comes to a parent because they're already off, they're already on guard about everything. So you don't want to have anything that could potentially be offensive. And you also don't want to make them feel like their concern that they had was not real. I mean, even if it was something that you felt like was silly, say, wow, that's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal in their minds. So just be really careful with humor, but If you can turn it back on yourself, that usually works a lot better. And then we talked about accept and legitimize. And again, acknowledging something that you hear is very different than saying, yep, we're going to do that, or we agree with that. But writing it down can be helpful. When we facilitate, even though you all are taking notes on your IEP, I have charts all over the place on the wall. I'll have big Post-it charts. And key information that people say, I go ahead and write it down so everyone can see it at all times. Doesn't mean anybody agreed to anything. If we have agreements, I also put agreements up there. But just putting information up to say, oh, somebody heard me, right? And then I go back through later and look through things and say, did we address this? Have we dealt with this one? And I look through all those key notes and say, yeah, we didn't talk about something and then forget to do any planning about it. We dealt with it in one way or the other. Sometimes you know what the issues are, and sometimes you don't have a clue. You'd like to think that you can predict the hard conferences, but you really can't always. Some conferences that you think are just going to be so easy that I could just schedule 45 minutes and know we're probably going to get out early, come back to haunt you because you just don't see the hidden agendas. That's why they're hidden. But sometimes you can anticipate those things and make sure that you do some planning in advance about possibilities. So, if it's a really hard issue like placement issues or a major service issue, have some ideas to where if what we think is best is just not going to work or be acceptable, then I have a backup plan that I could offer. You never want to propose something that you can't do or shouldn't be doing because we do have an obligation as the school team to offer an appropriate plan. That's part of that free, appropriate public education. It has to have the A in there. It's got to have the appropriate piece. So you can't propose something just to make a parent happy, right? It still has to be something that will meet the student's needs. But there's always a little flexibility within any plan. That's where you get the I in the IEP of individualized. And again, if you have some ideas ahead of time, then you can take those ideas and kind of analyze them in depth in the conference, looking at those advantages and limitations before making a decision. It can't boil down to which one is cheaper. It has to boil down to what's going to be appropriate for the student. And again, I know you guys have probably all heard this from your directors that appropriate does not mean offering the Cadillac, right? Yes, I know that a one-on-one would be great for just about anyone, at least for a period of time. A nice small class working with a wonderful system, that doesn't mean that's what you have to do for every student. There's no way that schools could afford to do that. What we do have to do is have an appropriate plan of all those things that would be needed to have the student make progress. And I think we already talked about this a little bit, but data is critical. This all should be data-driven. It keeps the emotions out, or at least to a minimum. It gives us a better picture, again, of where we are. Present levels should be very data-based. So we need to know where the student truly is now before we can predict where they need to be in a year. So think about it in advance to prep for that data. But then there are times when you get into the conference and you head down a road that you don't have data collected. Sometimes that happens when, as a teacher of record, you may not know everything that's going on with the student. I mean, you'd like to, but unless somebody has told you there's an issue, you don't always know. And it also depends on how much time you actually get to spend with that student and with the teachers that are also serving the student. So you may get into a situation and say, okay, we need more data. I can't even do anything with this until I get some more data. You have to figure out what kind of data you need, and then decide, is that something that I can just collect, or do we actually need a reevaluation to collect that? So if it's just that, okay, reading is not going so well, I need to collect some data to know what's going on with reading and figure out what we need to do next. I don't need a reeval to do that. Teachers are much better equipped to figure that stuff out than going through a whole reeval process with a standardized test that's not going to tell you anything different than you could figure out in 15 minutes on your own. If you have to collect data, though, you've got to figure out what you do in the meantime. Okay? This situation comes up a lot of times when you're in the middle of a conference and you realize, okay, we came to that behavior question. I wasn't thinking we'd need a behavior plan, but everybody in here is telling me this kid's behavior is interfering. Well, when you do that, it's now expecting you've got FBA data. But you're sitting in the middle of the conference, right? It's going to take some time to collect some good FBA data. But I've already said yes to that question, and now I've got to write a plan. So what are you going to do in the meantime while we're collecting more data? That's kind of a tricky situation. And you just do the best you can and figure out, okay, what are we going to work with now, knowing that we're probably going to change it once we gather some more information. Has that ever happened to you guys? So the question was, what do you do then in the behavior situation? Do you change it and mark no to the question? And I would say no. You would still have to mark yes, because that's the honest answer is yes, the student's behavior is impeding their learning or the learning of others, or however the wording is in the question. But then as you start filling out the information, you may have some holes to say, we need to collect more on this. This is what we think now based on what we have, but we're going to need to also pursue a formal FBA. And then you generate what you can as best you can. But I would put in your notes, if you're planning on doing an FBA and coming back together, I would note that in your notes too. And that way it's clear. Again, that transparency, so everything's above board and everybody knows what the plan is. And I don't think you could get in trouble for any of that. Even though your behavior plan is not based on a good FBA, it's the best you can do in the meantime. It's almost like an emergency plan for that kid. Breaks are good. I know we're not taking a break because we're only going till 11:30, and I want to make sure you guys get as much information as you can. But during a conference, breaks can be really good because sometimes you just got to go, right? Sometimes we've been sitting for too long and I just need to get up and move. Or it may be that we're all just butting heads and taking a break just as that cool off time to let me process, or let me step out of the room and talk to my husband, or let me step out of the room as a teacher and talk to my principal and say, okay, I see where we're going. Are you going to be okay if we make this kind of decision? Have that discussion during that time. It's also important that when you get asked a question in a meeting that you don't know the answer to, that you don't make up something. That you just say, I don't know, let me check on that. Let's take a 5-minute break and let me call my director. Let me call my transportation person. Whatever it is, whoever the person that can answer the question. But if you need that information before you can move on, you can't just say, well, I think this is the answer, so let's go with this, and then we'll get back to it, because that can make all the difference in the world. Okay, this is a big one. Sitting there at the table doesn't always mean that you're participating. Not saying no doesn't mean that I'm in agreement, okay? So, there are a lot of times when you'll ask a question at a conference and say, okay, we all good with this? Okay, and you move on to the next thing. Some people do not speak up when they don't agree. Okay, so we need to find a way to make sure that we're getting participation from everyone, we're getting input from everyone, and that you're getting those agreements along the way. And so one thing I do is check in for agreements. So it's not, are we all good with this? It's, I'm looking eye to eye with every person. Are you good? Do you have any questions? Are you good with this? Okay. You're okay with us moving on? And I go from person to person because those agreements can be critical. You can ask for, give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. If you still have questions, give me a thumbs in the middle. Red, yellow, green. Making sure that we get input from everyone. So if I'm doing present levels, then I'm probably going to start with the parent in most cases and say, okay, let's talk about his reading. What do you see? What do you see him doing now? What's reading like at home? Okay, do we have some data, test data or anything like that? So I'm gathering that kind of data. And then I may look at every other person there and say, do you have additional information about Johnny's reading? Okay, what do you have for me? What do you have? And go around the table in that way. Same thing when you're talking about, not every teacher is going to be able to tell you about a kid's reading skills. The art teacher may not. But I can tell you every last teacher should have some information about learning behaviors, behavior, right? They can tell you how the student is doing in a lot of different things. Did they show up on time for your class? All those things that go into present levels. How am I doing right now? So asking for that input, not just, okay, tell me about reading, and then I chart a few things and move on, because you and you and you may not have given me anything just because you're a quiet person, or you think your input doesn't matter. And I think a lot of times the parent doesn't chime in on present levels when you're talking about the academics because they think, I don't have the input. Well, oh my gosh, they've got tons of input. Tell me, do you read with your child at home? When you do you have to correct them a lot? What is it like? How long can they read before they get bored and don't want to read anymore? How much help do you give with homework? How long can they sit for homework? All of those kind of things, depending on the age of the child and the functioning level of the child, that is really important. So again, if you've got a nice, welcoming, non-threatening environment, you're going to get a lot more participation out of the people who are at the table. Okay, at the meeting conclusion, this really depends on how you do it at your school. There are some schools that we type the IEP as we go. When we're done, we do a quick check, we print it out, it's right there for the parent to have and to sign. Other places that use up to those 2 weeks to get it to the parent. Again, some places that aren't actually typing in the IEP during the meeting, which I would say is not a good idea. There's nothing in the law that says you have to do it right then and there, but it is so to your advantage to have somebody either typing or writing it on a paper copy or something. If there are any signatures that you need, whether it's IEP kind of signatures or sometimes we end a meeting and say, I need a release form, anything like that needs to be signed. Review what you've done. Make sure if you come up with any specific action steps that you make sure everyone knows what they're responsible for. So if new data needs to be collected, and if I'm the one who's supposed to do it, when do you need it? Okay, clarify any of those steps. A lot of that's going to show up in the IEP. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we use a separate action plan when there are some key things that need to occur, like within the next couple of weeks. And if so, we write it up, copy it, and make sure that if my name is on it, I want a copy of it, because otherwise I honestly will forget. There are too many things going on in this world to keep track of every little detail. And if I don't usually put it in my phone, like if I didn't have today in my phone, I probably wouldn't be here and somebody would be trying to track me down because I would forget. There's just so much to remember. Try your best to end on time. If we're not going to end on time, and most of the meetings I go to that are the facilitated meetings, they are long. And we always set a kind of a drop dead time of, we've got to be out of here by this time. But as we get closer to that, if we're not on target, I pull us back together and say, okay, now we said we needed to end by 3 o'clock. We're not going to end by 3 o'clock and be through the IEP. So what do you guys want to do? Can you all agree to stay a little later and finish, or do we need to go ahead and also set a follow-up meeting time to complete the rest of this? But, you want to touch base along the way. Thank people for participating. I mean, everybody who came to this meeting just gave up an hour or 2 hours or whatever of their usual day, and nobody was doing their work for them while they were gone. It just means you get backlogged, you got more emails to answer and phone calls to return. So, thank people for being part of the meeting. Or if your students are there, if you're high school teachers, train your kids to thank all these people who just came together to help write your plan. Talk to them about that self-advocacy and following up on things like that. Somebody needs to walk the parents out. Don't dismiss them from the room. And make sure that people are kind of dispersing, because otherwise if the parent's walking out and everybody else is still sitting in place, if you've got another IEP meeting, let the parent know that. We're all going to stay here because we got another parent coming in. Otherwise, what it looks like is you're about to just meet and talk about me and what just happened, which you probably are. And that's, sometimes you do need to process those things. But it really, a lot of it's about appearance, and you don't want a parent to have to feel paranoid. So walk them out and talk to them about what's going to happen next. If I'm getting you the IEP now, if you should expect it in about 2 days, in about 10 days, okay? And how do they want to receive this? Some parents are fine with you sticking a copy in the backpack. Others are absolutely against that. If they have a fax, is it okay to send it by fax? Is it okay to send it by email? Just make some kind of agreement with the parent about that. All right. That's already a lot to consider and a lot to do, let alone all of the details of the IEP that you're responsible for and all the plans for the people who are teaching your class while you're out of the meeting. I mean, it's just crazy, all the stuff that you're expected to do. But the follow-up piece can be really big, too. All right, so the law says parents have to receive their written notice. And in this case, we're talking about the IEP, because our IEP document contains all those things that are required for that written notice of this is what we plan to do with your kid. Okay? They have to receive it within 10 business days. And this is one of the few places in the law that actually says business days and not school days. So what that means is if you met on the day before Christmas break, all those days that the banks are open while Christmas break is going on, those count. Those are ticking. Okay? So you got to get those things out right away. So it's not school days. It's business days. Okay? Now that says they have to receive it within 10 business days. If it's going in the mail, you can't mail it on the 10th day unless you've got the super postman, and I know I don't. We know that after they receive it, then on the 11th day after they receive it, we can implement it if we haven't gotten something back that says, I don't like this, or they haven't filed for due process or asked for mediation or something like that. Now, this always seems like such a short period of time, but if you think about this, that could be a long period of time. If I waited the whole 10 business days to get this to the parent, and then I couldn't actually implement the IEP, even though I'm doing the old one, services are never going to cease, but I can't make that change if there's a change in there until the 11th day after the parent has gotten the copy. That's like almost a month. I mean, that's a long period of time. So if you're going to do something that needs to happen right away, then you want to get it to the parent as soon as possible, and you want to ask them to go ahead and sign it so that you can implement it sooner. This normally isn't a big deal. Most of our ACRs, we're not making dramatic changes. And most of our parents will say, yeah, go ahead and start it right away. But you're not really covered legally unless you've already gone through this time window or you've gotten a physical signature on that IEP to say start it early. When you send parents their copy, you may want, even if it's just a Post-it note on there to say thanks for coming, call me anytime, or a letter, or even having students write notes either to their parent or to staff members who came to their meeting. We have a hard enough time getting kids to write. If you can give them extra credit for writing some thank you notes to people, that is great practice for them. And that's something that's kind of gone by the wayside in our society. When I was a little kid, if you got a present, I don't care if it was from Great Aunt Tessie, you wrote them an actual thank you note. Kids don't do that anymore. They just are not good with that standard communication. But we know that how this year ended kind of sets up what's going to happen next year, whether it's for you or a different teacher of record. If you end on a bad note this year, next year's not going to go that much better. There's already that expectation that, oh my God, I'm going to have to go through that again. I'm going to have to go through another meeting with that teacher or another meeting with that parent. So it can make a big difference. I would encourage you every now and then, not at every meeting, definitely, but every now and then, ask people, tell me what you thought of this meeting. Do you think we got everything we needed to out of it? Do you think the IEP was what it should be? Ask the parent, ask the student what they think. Whether it's part of talking to your principal who's maybe evaluating you and saying, tell me, what would you have me do differently? Some people use an actual evaluation tool to say, okay, this is kind of a standard rating. Tell me how you think this conference went. But if you ask for feedback, you're going to get some feedback, some positive, some negative. But if you can use it to make changes in the future, then you're going to be continually improving your own practices. All right, now, we are a little early because I wanted to talk before we do any kind of evaluation for this stuff. I wanted to talk about what you guys see as kind of maybe some unusual things that either you've done yourself or seen other people use in conferences to help make them better. And I'm going to give you one example. I did this presentation one time for InSource advocates. And one of the advocates, and those advocates from InSource are all parents of a child with a disability. Some who are grown, but all of the advocates there have had a child with a disability. And so they've been there, they walked that walk before. And one of the advocates said that especially when they're at a meeting for a student who is really challenging, whether it's behavior or whether it's they take so much physical energy, but there tends to be that instant negative pull for everything. Everything is about what the kid can't do or what they are doing that we don't want them to do. And this person, it was over a webinar, so I don't know whether it was a male or female, but they said, you know what, bring a picture of this kid to have sitting there at the conference. You forget that this kid is just a happy little kid and that they aren't out to make your life miserable, for 8 hours in a day, making you chase after them and constantly discipline them and that kind of thing. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, that there are times that you forget, this is a kid. This is a kid who likes to play in the mud and chase butterflies and, all that kind of stuff that you don't think about because all you see is he bit me and he pulled my hair and he spits all the time and, all this kind of stuff. So it helps reframe things. So, and And Christine, this is open to anybody out there too. Are there any specific things that you've seen somebody do or you've done yourself that you think, oh, this is a keeper. This is something I want to remember to do? I know you guys have tricks. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of summarize that and restate for those out there that when there are conflicts, like especially conflicts between a teacher and a student, that she'll meet with them ahead of time and try to work out some of those things and find out more of that information so that it can be brought up in the conference and it's not a surprise, but it can maybe be dealt with somewhat beforehand as well. You're right, if you get some of that stuff out, then it's not just laying there waiting to bite you in the middle of the conference. That is great, especially when it's positive. Yeah, so showing video clips, and I would encourage you to make sure any kind of videoing or photographing that you've got this cleared through your administrator. If the parent doesn't know that that's going to happen, or you haven't gotten, a lot of places will have a built-in consent at the beginning of the school year, but if you don't, that could be a problem too. But I think that's great. I mean, sometimes it's the negative thing where the parent says, well, I don't believe my kid would ever do that. Well, let me show you what it looks like here at school. Or there is that opposite where, you say, well, I've seen him do this. Well, no, they can't do that. And you have a video showing they can tie their shoe if you give them enough time. Or they can read more fluently if the pressure's down or whatever. But having those good examples, that is really good. It's a nice portfolio kind of thing to show. Okay, well, my information is up here, and you are welcome to contact me at any time. I know you all obviously know about the IEP Resource Center, or you wouldn't have had the wherewithal to sign up for this training. So for those of you out there joining us via the web, if you would also please complete the online training. And I appreciate everyone taking this snowy day to come in. I'll stick around for any other questions. So thank you.